There are wounds no one can see, wounds that don't bleed, yet leave you aching in silence. The kind of ache that doesn't come from broken bones or bruised skin, but from something far deeper, from a heart that trusted too much, loved too purely, and was handed back in shards. Betrayal has a way of doing that. It cuts in places where hands never touched. It's not just that they walked away, it's how they walked away, with your secrets, your sacrifices, your softness, and never looked back. And isn't that the cruel irony? That the people you let into the most sacred parts of your soul are the ones who strike with the sharpest knives. You gave them loyalty, and they returned it with deception. You gave them your heart, and they treated it as disposable. But let me tell you something that can only be seen through the eyes of faith. What they shattered, God is now shielding. What they mishandled, God is now holding. Because here's a truth the world often forgets. God is not just a healer of wounds. He is the guardian of what the world has broken. When your heart is torn apart by betrayal, He doesn't simply patch it up. He surrounds it. He anoints it with favor. He places His presence like armor around the very place they tried to destroy. But it never feels like that at first, does it? In the quiet, tear-streaked nights, it feels like you've been abandoned not just by them, but by heaven itself. You wonder how someone could be so heartless, how they could walk away without remorse, without even glancing at the destruction they left behind. And still, you stood there, holding the pieces of your heart like fragile glass, not even knowing where to begin. But God saw you. He saw you in the moment your heart cracked open. He saw the silent screams, the conversations you replayed 1,000 times, the self-blame that wrapped itself around your soul like a serpent. He saw how you almost stopped believing in goodness because the person you trusted most made goodness feel like a lie. And He whispered, "That heart is mine now." You see, when they betrayed you, they didn't just betray a relationship. They betrayed something sacred. They betrayed the love that God had deposited within you. They betrayed purity, kindness, loyalty, the very things that reflect His image. And God does not take that lightly. He is not distant in your pain. He is defensive. He becomes fiercely protective over what they tried to ruin. It's in moments like these that favor becomes more than a blessing. It becomes a shield. Because the truth is, betrayal doesn't just hurt, it changes you. It tempts you to harden your heart, to withhold your light, to become like them, so you'll never be hurt again. But God's favor doesn't just guard you from others, it guards you from becoming bitter. It preserves the tenderness in you that this world doesn't deserve but desperately needs. His favor isn't always loud. It doesn't always come in thunderclaps and miracles. Sometimes it shows up in quiet strength, in doors opening while others are slammed shut, in divine detours that lead you away from another heartbreak, in the peace that makes no sense when your world feels like it's falling apart. And perhaps the most beautiful part is this: those who thought they could destroy you will soon witness a version of you they can no longer access, not because you became cruel like them, but because God elevated you where they can no longer reach. So don't curse the betrayal. It was the confirmation of your purity. Don't mourn the one who left. Their absence made space for divine protection. And don't think your heart will remain shattered forever, because God doesn't just restore, He guards, He seals, He surrounds your heart with favor, not so it will never be broken again, but so it will never be betrayed the same way again. Now, let's journey deeper into the truths behind this divine protection. Betrayal exposes something the world often tries to overlook: the vulnerability of the pure in heart. When someone betrays you, it is rarely about the failure of discernment or judgment. It's often a revelation of your willingness to love without armor, to believe without suspicion, and to give without keeping score. That kind of heart is rare. That kind of heart reflects the divine. It is the heart that mirrors God's own mercy, grace, and gentleness. And the moment it is betrayed, heaven takes notice. There's something sacred about that level of innocence. When it's mishandled, when it's scorned, when it's shattered by the very ones who are supposed to protect it, something spiritual happens. The betrayal becomes not just an offense against you, it becomes an offense against the divine fingerprint on your soul. God does not allow that to go unchecked. You might not see it immediately, but the moment betrayal occurs, God steps in, not with thunder, not with vengeance, but with a silent yet powerful form of intervention, protection, because what they touched in you was holy. It was the part of you that reflects His image, your patience, your tenderness, your kindness in the face of cruelty. Those were glimpses of God through your humanity. And when someone betrays that, they betray more than a person. They betray a light that was trying to love them into healing. That is why God guards it. He doesn't just heal you. Healing, as powerful as it is, only mends what was torn. But when God guards, He covers, He surrounds. He places favor around the wound so that nothing like that can reach the same depth again. You might think you're still vulnerable, still broken, still too soft for a harsh world. But what you don't see is what God is doing behind the scenes. He is wrapping your heart in layers of divine awareness. He is repelling people who carry similar intent as those who once hurt you. You wonder why some people walk away so suddenly, why some connections die before they bloom. That's not rejection, that's Betrayal has a way of convincing you that you were the problem, that if only you had been stronger, more distant, less open, it wouldn't have hurt so much. But that's not truth. That's trauma speaking. The truth is, your vulnerability is not a weakness. It is the proof that your soul is still alive in a world growing cold. And God is guarding that rare light with favor, not to make you untouchable, but to make you discerning. You will love again, yes, but you will love with wisdom. You will offer yourself again, but not to those who come to take and leave you empty. You will walk with softness, but your softness will no longer be exposed without His shield. So let this be known. What was betrayed was not a flaw, it was a gift. And God guards His gifts jealously. They treated your heart as disposable, but heaven declared it invaluable. And what heaven values, it surrounds, with favor, with discernment, with boundaries built not out of fear, but out of reverence for what once was profaned. Favor is a misunderstood word. Too often we reduce it to something material, success, open doors, blessings in the form of things. But favor is deeper than that. Favor is God's silent endorsement. It is His way of declaring to the universe, this one is mine. And when God marks you with favor, it doesn't just bring opportunity, it brings protection. That's why your life has shifted since the betrayal. That's why you're no longer where you once were, even emotionally. Because favor isn't passive, it's active. It's God's hand rerouting your steps, adjusting your circle, closing off harmful access points. It's Him creating a barrier that others can't see, but you can feel. There are things that should have broken you by now. There are wounds that should have made you bitter. There are memories that should have haunted you into despair, and yet somehow you're still here, thinking, feeling, growing. That's not coincidence. That's favor. That's divine interference working behind the veil. You may still feel the sting of the betrayal, but look again. Do you notice how some things don't hit you the same way anymore? That's not emotional numbness. That's spiritual insulation. You are not as exposed as you once were. You are not as open to destruction as you once feared, because God's favor is now standing between you and the next wound that was meant to finish what the first one started. And here's a deeper truth. God doesn't just place favor around you because you were betrayed. He does it because he sees what you would have become without his covering. He saw the alternate paths, the bitterness, the rage, the self-destruction, and he said no, not for this one, not for the one who still prays while in pain, not for the one who could have turned cruel, but chose instead to stay kind. That kind of heart is not left unguarded. That kind of soul is not left exposed to repeat violation. So, in his mercy, God builds walls, not to isolate you, but to elevate you. This is why some people can't reach you anymore, not because you're arrogant or unforgiving, but because God's favor has filtered your access. He knows your heart is still tender. He knows your trust is still healing. And until it's fully mended, he stands guard. His favor becomes your boundary, his discernment your defense, and those who try to come near with hidden daggers find themselves blocked, not by your efforts, but by divine hands that say, not again. So if it feels lonely, don't confuse that with abandonment. It's not emptiness. It's God clearing the space, clearing it from users, liars, manipulators, and counterfeit love. And in that clearing, he is planting something real, something holy, something worthy of the heart they betrayed. There are moments when pain becomes prayer, when the betrayal sinks so deep that you no longer have the words, only the groanings of a wounded soul. You stop trying to explain it to others because the betrayal wasn't just relational. It was spiritual. Something sacred inside you was violated. And in that silence, when no one else saw the depth of your ache, heaven leaned in closer. God heard what your voice couldn't utter. He received what your spirit was too tired to say out loud. And in that moment, something powerful happened. What was pain became intercession, and what was betrayal became the spark that set divine intervention in motion. There's a realm of favor that is only unlocked through suffering. It's not earned through perfection or performance. It's accessed when your heart is cracked wide open and yet you still choose not to turn bitter. God sees that. He responds to it. He draws near to the broken-hearted, not because they are weak, but because they are precious. Precious enough to comfort, precious enough to cover, precious enough to favor. And so your pain became a prayer, and your tears became a signal in the spirit that reached the heart of God. You were never alone in your sorrow. Though people may have walked away and left you carrying the weight of their betrayal, God remained, not just beside you, but active on your behalf. The favor you're stepping into now is not random. It's the fruit of the unseen moments, the nights you cried yourself to sleep, but still whispered his name. The mornings you got up with a heart half shattered, but still chose to be kind. Those moments weren't wasted. They were seeds, and favor is the harvest. That's why your life is beginning to shift. That's why some doors are opening that you didn't knock on. That's why you're being drawn to peace instead of chaos, to stillness instead of noise, to purpose instead of confusion. It's not just healing, it's direction. God is not merely restoring what you lost. He is reshaping your path to align with the weight of favor that is now being placed upon your life. Because when your pain becomes a prayer, heaven moves. You may not feel like your heart is whole yet, and that's okay. Healing is not always immediate, but favor often begins before healing is complete. God begins to protect you even while you're still bleeding. He begins to reroute your life even while the memories still sting, because he knows the power of divine timing. He knows what you're stepping into is too valuable to be tainted by unhealed wounds or unresolved emotions. So he surrounds you early. He builds the fence while the garden is still being replanted. And that fence is called favor. It's not just to keep the wrong people out. It's to keep the right spirit within you intact. It's to guard your purity, your hope, your belief in love, the very things that the betrayal tried to kill. And because you didn't let it die, because you still chose light even while standing in the dark, God answered, not with just blessings but with boundaries, not just with restoration but with revelation. You now walk in a realm of guarded grace. And those who thought they destroyed you are slowly discovering they didn't silence your spirit. They activated heaven's response. Sometimes what we think is a setback is actually a redirection from God's own hands. You thought your heart was being ripped away from something you needed, someone you trusted, a life you imagined. But in truth, God was rescuing you. He was answering a prayer you didn't even know how to pray. Lord, protect me from what looks like love, but isn't. And in His mercy, He removed you. He took your heart out of the hands that couldn't handle it. He severed the bond you were too loyal to break, not as punishment, but as preservation. But redirection doesn't always feel holy. Often it feels like devastation. You mourn the loss, you question your worth, you replay every moment trying to figure out what you could have done differently. But divine protection doesn't wait for your understanding. It acts at the precise moment your spirit is in danger. And God knew what was coming before you did. He saw the trap in the promise, the poison in the kiss, the danger in the closeness. And so He pulled you away, abruptly, painfully. The problem is, we often confuse God's protection with rejection. We think we were discarded, abandoned, forgotten. But the truth is we were redirected, not away from something, but toward something better. And that something is guarded favor. You didn't lose love. You lost a counterfeit that would have drained you until nothing was left. You didn't lose opportunity. You lost the illusion of a future that wasn't aligned with your calling. You didn't lose yourself. You were being returned to yourself. When God guards your heart with favor, it's not just about keeping you from harm. It's about preserving your assignment. There are things you've been called to do, people you're meant to impact, legacies you're meant to build. And those things require a whole heart, not one shackled by betrayal or weighed down by false attachments. So God in His wisdom doesn't wait for you to give it up. He intervenes. He reroutes, He removes, and though it feels like rejection, it's the most intimate act of divine care you could ever experience. And now you're walking in that redirection. You may not see the full picture yet, but the fog is lifting. Slowly, you're starting to feel lighter, clearer, more aware of who you are and what you carry. And that's no accident. That's favor at work, quietly closing doors that were draining you, gently guiding you away from familiar pain, firmly anchoring you in a future that no longer echoes betrayal, but breathes healing and purpose. God's redirection isn't always comfortable, but it's always perfect. He removes not just the people who betrayed you, but the parts of yourself that were willing to settle for being mistreated. And in their place, He places discernment, boundaries, confidence, and the peace that comes from knowing, if it left, it wasn't worthy of the favor you now carry. If it stayed, it would have hindered what heaven is about to release. So let Him reroute you. Let Him redirect you. For every no, there is a divine yes waiting. And that yes comes wrapped in grace, sealed in favor, and guarded by the one who knows your heart better than anyone else ever could. They thought they were walking away from you, but they didn't realize they were also walking away from the favor of God that surrounded you. That's what they never saw coming. Because when God sets his hand upon someone, when he marks a heart as his own, being connected to that person becomes a divine privilege. It is not just about emotional intimacy or human connection. It is about spiritual alignment. And when someone mistreats a heart that carries heaven's favor, they don't just lose you, they lose what was flowing through you. They lose access to the peace you carried into every room. They lose the prayers you whispered for their success. They lose the grace that was covering their life simply because of your presence in it. God's favor is not just a feeling. It is a spiritual force. It hovers, it protects, and it blesses. And for a while, they got to enjoy the overflow of your favor without even realizing it. But instead of honoring it, they exploited it. Instead of protecting your heart, they pierced it. Instead of recognizing what God had given them, they threw it away. And now, that favor has retracted from them, not out of cruelty, but out of justice. Because divine favor is never meant to be wasted in spaces that treat sacred things as ordinary. And so now they sit in the silence, wondering why the peace left, why everything that once seemed effortless now feels like resistance, why the light that once filled their world suddenly dimmed the moment they let go of your hand. It's not a curse, it's a consequence. The favor wasn't in the circumstances. It was in you. It was the way God smiled on your life and allowed those near you to feel the warmth of that smile. But now that they've betrayed the vessel, they've forfeited the warmth, and nothing feels the same. Meanwhile, God is elevating you, slowly, deliberately, divinely. He's not doing it out of vengeance. He's doing it because now, without their draining presence, your favor can flourish. You're no longer carrying the weight of someone who only knew how to take. You're no longer praying for someone who only saw your value when they needed something. And so now, the favor that was once being siphoned is being stored. And from that storage, God is building something new, something that can't be touched by the ones who walked away. This is why they can't access you anymore. Not because you've changed in bitterness, but because God has changed your surroundings. You are being repositioned in places where your favor is honored, not harvested. In rooms where your presence is seen as a blessing, not a convenience. In relationships where your loyalty is matched, not manipulated. And those who once took you for granted are now realizing they didn't just lose a person, they lost a portal, a sacred connection, a divine covering. And nothing they chase now will fill the void of what they discarded so carelessly. Your heart is not a common thing. It was never meant to be left exposed to those who refuse to handle it with reverence. And God knows that. He knows the weight you carry. He knows the loyalty you give. He knows how many times you've loved beyond reason, forgiven beyond logic, and stayed beyond your breaking point, all because your heart is wired to reflect His compassion. But even God draws lines. Even heaven has boundaries, and there comes a time when the heart He placed in you becomes too holy to be mishandled again. And so He steps in, not just to restore you, but to guard you. Your healing is not happening in isolation. It is happening in protection. You're not just being made whole again, you're being shielded as it happens. Because the heart that endured so much cannot afford to be exposed the same way again. It is too valuable, too refined by pain, too close to the throne of grace. And so, God has placed you in a season of preservation. That's why certain people can't reach you anymore. Why certain relationships have crumbled, why certain atmospheres feel suffocating. You didn't change randomly. God reoriented your spirit. You are no longer accessible in the same way, because the territory you're being led into cannot accommodate unhealed souls who only come to consume. God is preserving your purity, your perspective, your peace, the very things the betrayal tried to steal. And it's not just people he's protecting you from, it's cycles. Cycles of proving your worth, of overgiving, of accepting crumbs and calling it connection. Those days are over. Because the heart that God guards doesn't beg anymore. It doesn't chase. It doesn't apologize for its sensitivity or its depth. It simply stands covered in favor, anchored in purpose, unafraid to be fully seen. You see, when God places his protection around you, it isn't a wall, it's a filter. The wrong ones can no longer find you, no matter how hard they try. The ones who once knew how to access your soul will now find locked doors and sealed windows, not because you're hiding, but because God has redefined your worth, and he will not allow his treasure to be trampled underfoot again. This preservation is not punishment, it's preparation. You are being refined for divine alignment, for the kind of love that doesn't require you to shrink or suffer, for friendships that won't exploit your empathy, for environments that don't mistake kindness for weakness. Your heart is no longer unguarded. It is encased in favor, and anything that wishes to reach it now must go through God first. That is the level of divine protection you're walking in, not because you demanded it, but because your endurance qualified you for it. Heaven does not ignore the cries of the brokenhearted. It surrounds them, and in that surrounding you are not just healing, you are being made sacred. You are not just recovering, you are being reserved, not for isolation, but for something too holy to be defiled by another betrayal. Sometimes we wonder why betrayal had to come through the very people we loved the most. Why did the ones who knew your heart so well choose to crush it instead of protect it? Why did those you would have defended without question become the ones who attacked you without warning? The pain didn't just come from the betrayal. It came from who did the betraying. It came from the closeness, the shared memories, the intimate truths exchanged in moments of trust. They didn't just walk away. They carried pieces of you with them, and they didn't look back. And yet, even in their silence, even in their absence, God was writing something. You didn't know it then, but the moment they turned their back on your heart, heaven turned its face toward you. There was no grand announcement, no lightning bolt, no immediate change in your circumstance. But in the spirit, something shifted. You were marked, not as forsaken, but as chosen. And the betrayal, as painful as it was, became the closing chapter of a book God never intended for you to finish reading. You kept trying to turn back the pages, trying to rewrite the ending, but God had already sealed it with purpose. He allowed the betrayal not to break you, but to break the hold of something that was never meant to carry you forward. And now they are watching, not necessarily with their eyes, but in their spirit they know. They know they walked away from something pure, something divinely touched, something that only God could have placed in their life. And what once felt replaceable now haunts them with regret. Because you can't betray a heart that carries God's fingerprint and walk away untouched. Life may not punish them in the way you imagined, but it will teach them the absence of your heart, your prayers, your presence. It will echo loudly, repeatedly, until they understand they weren't just careless with a person, they were careless with favor. Meanwhile, God is not just healing you. He is rebuilding you in front of them, silently, powerfully, gracefully. You may not even realize it, but your peace is speaking louder than your pain ever could. Your growth is echoing louder than your grief. And your stillness? It's thundering through the spiritual realm like a roar. because nothing terrifies those who betrayed you more than knowing you survived what they thought would destroy you, and now you thrive where they left you bleeding. This is where God reveals his justice, not always through revenge, but through restoration. Through a life so guarded by his favor that nothing broken can enter again. A life so covered by his grace that betrayal becomes a footnote, not the headline. You are becoming a living testimony, a walking contradiction to what they thought would be your end. Every day you rise, every time you smile again, every moment you refuse to let bitterness take root. It's a proclamation that God has indeed guarded your heart, not just from others, but from the war they tried to start within you. So now here you stand, not shattered, but sanctified, not bitter, but better, not abandoned, but anchored in a love that betrayal can never touch. God saw it all. The nights you collapsed in prayer, begging him to make sense of what made no sense at all. The tears you cried in silence, too ashamed to admit how deeply you were wounded. He didn't just observe, he intervened. And while you thought nothing was happening, favor was forming. A sacred hedge was being built around your heart, not to isolate you, but to preserve you for what's coming. Because what's coming is too holy to be mishandled. The next chapter of your life requires a heart that is guarded, not just healed. A heart that beats with the wisdom of experience and the softness of someone who chose not to let pain define them. A heart protected by the very one who created it. They betrayed your heart, but they couldn't destroy it, because what they didn't know is that your heart belongs to the God who defends what's his. And now, every beat of your heart echoes with this divine truth. You are guarded, you are chosen, you are favored, and nothing they did, no matter how deep, can undo what heaven has declared over you. You are safe in God's keeping, and no one can break what God himself is holding.